Remember the 20 things that made the 4th of July feel truly special? Back in the 1970s, these simple traditions, parades, cookouts, sparklers, weren't just fun. They were the heart of how we celebrated freedom, family, and summer itself. When did a holiday about coming together start feeling so far away? There was just something magical about decorating your bike for the 4th of July when you were a kid in the 1970s. Red, white, and blue streamers wrapped around the handlebars, baseball cards clipped to the spokes for that perfect flap, flap, flap sound, and maybe a flag duct taped to the seat post if you really wanted to go all out. It was not about having the coolest bike on the block. It was about being part of something. Neighborhood bike parades were a 4th of July staple in towns big and small. Nobody had smartphones or apps to tell them when it was starting. You just knew. You looked down the street and saw Bobby from 2 doors down rolling past with a paper streamer hanging off his banana seat, and you grabbed your bike and followed. It was kid instinct. Most of the time, the parade would end in a cul-de-sac or church parking lot, where someone's mom would pass out orange slices or popsicles from a cooler, and that was the best treat in the world. If your parents were extra enthusiastic, you might have a little homemade sign on the front that said something like Liberty Riders or Freedom Patrol. You had no idea what those meant, but you felt proud anyway. It was a parade of freedom, jelly sandals, and sunburned shoulders. Nobody was watching from the sidelines. Everyone was in it. And in that moment, you felt like you were part of a nation, one neighborhood at a time. If you did not grow up in the 1970s cranking your arm off just to make one small batch of vanilla ice cream, did you even have a summer? Homemade ice cream makers were the true underdog hero of every 4th of July. They were big, heavy, and a pain to clean. But none of that mattered when you finally tasted that cold, creamy scoop at the end of a hot day. You could hear the crunch of the rock salt in the bucket, the hum of the motor if you had the fancy electric one, or the tired groaning if you were still stuck with the hand crank version. Kids would take turns because someone's arm always gave out, and there would always be that one cousin who claimed they could do it faster and better. The best part was not the ice cream. It was the wait, the anticipation. The grown-ups would be manning the grill and talking politics, but you were watching the barrel like a hawk, praying that the churning would finally stop so you could dive in. And when it did, you would swear it was the best ice cream you had ever eaten, even if it was mostly just milk, cream, and sugar with a splash of fake vanilla extract. No sprinkles, no cones, just bowls. Maybe a red plastic spoon from the corner store. If your aunt was feeling generous, you might get strawberries on top. It was sticky, it was slow, and it was perfect. Homemade ice cream was not just a dessert, it was a whole event. One where the whole family gathered around a noisy old machine and made something sweet together. That is how 4th of July tasted back then. Not everyone had money for the big fireworks, but every kid in the 1970s had a pack of snakes and sparklers, and honestly, that was enough. The snakes came in those tiny black tablets, like little forgotten buttons. You would light one on the driveway and watch it slowly curl up into this ash-colored creature that looked like it came out of a campfire. It was not loud, it was not flashy, but it felt like magic. And for a few seconds you were a scientist or a wizard, bending fire to your will. Sparklers were even better. Parents would hand them out cautiously, usually saying something like, "Hold it away from your face," as if that was enough to keep a 7-year-old from running in circles with literal fire in their hand. But that was the whole thrill of it, the sizzle, the shower of golden sparks, the way the smoke curled in the air and stuck to your clothes. You would write your name in the air over and over, even though it never lasted long enough to finish. Someone always burned their fingers, someone always dropped one on the lawn, and someone, usually your older cousin, tried to light 2 at once like it was some kind of sword fight. But no one cared, because sparklers were for everyone. You did not need a permit, a backyard, or a trip to the fireworks stand. Just a couple of sticks and a box of matches, and you had yourself a celebration. It was freedom in your hand, glowing, sizzling, and just dangerous enough to feel like something special. Before the backyard fireworks and the watermelon eating contests, the morning of the 4th always started the same way, with the town parade. In the 1970s, Civic Center and Veterans of Foreign Wars parades were not small events. They were the main attraction. You would sit on the curb with your cousins, waving little paper flags that came stapled to a popsicle stick while trying to spot your neighbor's dad walking in uniform or your sister's dance team doing a shaky routine to Yankee Doodle Dandy. There was nothing fancy about it. The floats were just hay bales on flatbeds. The marching band was out of tune, and the candy being thrown from old pickup trucks was half-melted Tootsie Rolls and stale mints. But none of that mattered. You were not there for perfection. You were there for pride. The VFW guys in their pressed uniforms and white gloves saluting the flag as it passed by. The high school band sweating through their polyester uniforms. The cheerleaders tossing batons and hoping not to drop them. It was a whole town coming together, one block at a time. People would clap, not because they had to, but because they meant it. You could feel the weight of history in those parades, the generations standing side by side, remembering what the day was really about. It was not just spectacle, it was service. It was respect. And for a lot of kids, that was their first real glimpse at what patriotism actually looked like. Not something flashy, just something proud. The smell of charcoal meant one thing in the 1970s. It was officially time to celebrate the 4th of July. You could smell it 3 houses down, and that alone was enough to make you wander into someone else's backyard like a hungry dog. The grill master, usually somebody's uncle wearing tube socks and a Kiss the Cook apron, would be hunched over a Weber kettle, flipping burgers with one hand and holding a cold can of beer in the other. That big black dome-shaped grill was the centerpiece of every summer cookout, and it was treated like sacred ground. There was no propane shortcut, no push-button ignition. You had to earn your cookout. You would start with the charcoal chimney, or just a match and a prayer, and wait for those coals to go white. And when they did, the whole world changed. Hot dogs would split at the ends. Corn would char just enough to smell sweet. The burgers were basic. Ground beef, maybe some onion mixed in if you were feeling fancy. But they were unforgettable. Everyone had their own method too. Some swore by soaking wood chips. Others used beer as a marinade. And of course, someone would always start a fire too big and need to borrow a spray bottle. But that was part of the fun. The backyard grill was not just about food. It was about ritual. It was the smell of a holiday, the taste of a season. A charcoal grill meant the family was together, the lawn chairs were out, and summer had officially arrived. If you saw a Tupperware pitcher sitting on a picnic table in the 1970s, you already knew what was inside. Red KoolAid, sweating through the plastic like it had a life of its own. The lid never quite fit right after the second wash, and the spout had a little flip top that never stayed closed, but it was the drink of the summer. It tasted like sugar and mystery. Was it cherry? Fruit punch? Watermelon? No one knew. All we knew was that it was ice cold, neon red, and it stained your upper lip like a rite of passage. Every family had that one stained pitcher, usually orange, maybe green, and it only came out when there were more than 5 people gathered and paper plates were involved. The grown-ups would fill it with tap water, add the mix from that tiny paper packet, and then dump in what felt like 2 pounds of sugar. A long-handled spoon would swirl through the liquid like some kind of sacred paddle, and then, voila, you had your party drink. KoolAid went hand in hand with fireworks, sparklers, and flip-flops that melted in the sun. You could hear it sloshing in plastic cups at every backyard gathering, pool party, and front yard picnic blanket. It was cheaper than soda, easier than lemonade, and way more exciting than water. Plus, if you were lucky, someone's mom would let you freeze it into ice cubes or popsicles, turning a 10-cent packet into a whole afternoon of sticky joy. Red KoolAid was the flavor of freedom, bright, bold, impossible to wash out of your shirt, and we loved every sip. There was no summer thrill like showing up to the public pool on the 4th of July and seeing the hand-drawn poster that said, "Cannonball Contest at 2 p.m. You knew right then it was going to be a legendary day. Back in the 1970s, public pools were the beating heart of summer. chlorine, hot concrete, lifeguards with mirrored sunglasses, and that sharp whistle that meant no running, even though everyone was. But on the 4th of July, things hit different. There were races, diving competitions, water balloon fights, and sometimes even a greasy watermelon in the deep end. It was absolute chaos, and we lived for it. Your mom would spread out a towel on a patch of half-shade while you sprinted off barefoot, dodging bees and pretending you were training for the Olympics. There were popsicles melting faster than you could eat them, and the only thing that matched the heat of the pavement was the energy in the air. The 4th meant prizes, too. A ribbon for the best splash, a cheap plastic trophy, or maybe just bragging rights until school started again. The lifeguards got in on it too, usually tossing in a few coins for a diving scavenger hunt. You would hold your breath, dive like your life depended on it, and come up gasping with a nickel in your palm like you just struck gold. The snack shack would be doing record business, selling lukewarm nachos and those giant jawbreakers no kid could ever finish. By the end of the day, your hair smelled like sunblock and chlorine, and your fingertips were raisin-wrinkled from hours in the water. But you left with a smile, a sunburn, and a story to tell. That pool was more than just a swim. It was the stage for summer memories. If you were around for the bicentennial in 1976, you remember it like it was yesterday, because for the whole year leading up to it, the 4th of July went from a holiday to a full-blown movement. Even in 1975, the buzz had already started. Every parade, school bulletin board, and Saturday morning cartoon was talking about 200 years of America. Red, white, and blue were not just holiday colors anymore. They were everywhere. On plates, paper napkins, lawn chairs, cereal boxes, even soap dispensers. If it could be branded, it got branded. There were commemorative coins in your cereal box, bicentennial quarters in your piggy bank, flags on every porch and stickers slapped on every station wagon. Your dad might have grown a mustache just to look more colonial. And if your town had a parade, it probably had a homemade float with someone dressed as Betsy Ross, awkwardly waving in the summer heat. It was not just about the past. It was about pride. There was this strange, warm feeling, like everyone in the country was on the same page, at least for one day. You might have watched a special on television about George Washington and then run outside to see your neighbor grilling hot dogs in a shirt with a giant bald eagle on it. It was that kind of year. The kind that made fireworks feel a little louder and the national anthem a little prouder. By the time the actual 4th of July rolled around in 1976, it felt like the grand finale of an entire year's worth of buildup. You did not just celebrate Independence Day, you witnessed it. The bicentennial was big, bold, and unforgettable, and for a lot of families, it was the most patriotic summer they ever experienced. Long before stadiums and arenas started competing over the biggest fireworks display, families in the 1970s had a simpler and, frankly, better option: the drive-in fireworks show. You would pile into the car hours early, back when traffic still meant waving at your neighbors and sneaking a peek into someone else's trunk to see who brought the good snacks. You would find a parking spot, roll down the windows, and let the warm summer air drift in while you set up lawn chairs or plopped down on a blanket right on the hood. The local AM station would play patriotic tunes on loop. Sometimes a tired teenager in a greasy apron would walk up to your window and take your popcorn order like it was a Hollywood premiere. It was slow. It was quiet. It was perfect. Kids would run around the cars with sparklers, and moms would shush them just enough to say they tried. Dads would sip from a hidden thermos and tell stories that got longer every time they were told. And then, just when you thought the bugs were going to win the night, the sky would light up. Reds, blues, golds, fireworks that cracked like thunder and echoed across the parking lot. People would cheer from their hoods, their pickup beds, their little bubble of the world. You would lay back, look up, and feel completely full. Not from the popcorn, but from something else. Something warm. Something proud. Drive-in fireworks were not just about the show. They were about the gathering. A whole town in one lot, heads tilted to the sky, remembering that some things, like a night of light and color, could bring everyone together. In the 1970s, if you were under 5 years old on the 4th of July, you were not just going for a walk. You were being paraded. Wagons and strollers became moving displays of patriotism, creativity, and whatever streamers your mom had left over from Memorial Day. Red, white, and blue crepe paper would be wrapped around the handles. Tiny flags would stick out of plastic cup holders. And if you were the lucky toddler riding inside, you probably had a paper crown or glittery star taped to your sun hat. You had no idea what was going on, but you were loving every second. Parents took it seriously too. It was not just about getting from point A to point B, it was about the presentation. Someone's dad would spray paint an old radio flyer, while moms cut out cardboard eagles to tape to the sides. Some even had music, tiny radios playing Sousa marches, while the baby inside just blinked at the noise and chewed on a rubber ring. It was not about winning anything. It was about being seen, being part of the celebration. The kids in strollers did not care about the barbecue or the fireworks. They had their own spotlight, wheels, and all. It was a way of saying, even the littlest ones belong here. And that meant something. Because even if you did not remember the moment, the pictures sure did. And those paper crown babies, they were the heart of the whole parade. Back in the 1970s, the 4th of July did not officially start until you made the trip out to the Firecracker Stand on the edge of town. These were not shiny big box stores or city-sponsored tents. These were dusty roadside setups, plywood booths with hand-painted signs that said things like "Buy one, get one free" or "Best booms in the county." You could smell the gunpowder before you even got out of the car. There would always be a guy in a sleeveless shirt and trucker hat manning the table like it was sacred ground. And in a way, it was. You would walk up slow, pretending to know what you were doing, eyes wide at the racks of bottle rockets, Roman candles, and those little tanks that spit sparks and never went straight. The best part was the mystery packs, brown paper bags stapled shut and sold with a wink. "Guaranteed fun," the guy would say. And somehow they always delivered. Even if it was just smoke bombs and snakes, it felt like you were carrying home a box of magic. The grown-ups would hover, reminding you to keep it safe while sneaking a pack of firecrackers into their own shopping pile. Everyone had the same idea. Stock up, light responsibly, and hope nobody set the lawn on fire this year. It was freedom, $5 at a time. No permits, no online orders, just a booth, a handshake, and a spark of excitement. Because for a kid in the 70s, the Firecracker Stand was more than a store. It was a summer pilgrimage, a dusty little stop at the edge of town where everyone became a pyrotechnic for a day. There was a certain sound to the 4th of July in the 1970s, and it came from a big wooden box in the living room, the console stereo. Before Bluetooth, before compact discs, before you could just shout at a speaker, there was vinyl. Thick records that slid from cardboard sleeves, placed with care on a turntable that crackled to life. Your dad would cue up the patriotic albums, John Philip Sousa marches, maybe a little Ray Charles singing "America the Beautiful," or even a spoken-word version of the Declaration of Independence by someone with a deep, serious voice. It was not always high fidelity. The needle skipped, the bass buzzed, and somebody had to sit real still so the record would not wobble on the warped floorboard. But that music filled the house like nothing else. It was loud, proud, and unapologetically American. Sometimes it would drift out through the screen door, across the lawn, into the streets where the neighbors were setting up lawn chairs or stringing bunting between porch posts. The crackle of a needle, the thump of a bass drum, the voice of a nation echoing out into a living room with shag carpet and panel walls. The whole thing felt ceremonial, like even if you were not out watching fireworks, you were still part of the celebration, right there between the speakers. You could always tell which house was hosting the 4th of July potluck by the sheer number of Pyrex dishes on the counter. And no matter who was cooking, there were always two things you could count on: macaroni salad and Jello molds. These dishes were not optional. They were the stars of the folding table buffet, parked between the deviled eggs and the baked beans like royalty in a sea of side dishes. The macaroni salad was cold, creamy, and somehow always better after sitting in the fridge for a day. Elbow noodles, mayonnaise, chopped celery, and a hard-boiled egg or two. That was the blueprint. Some folks got fancy with pimentos or green olives, but the real pros knew you did not mess too much with a classic. It was scooped onto paper plates with a plastic spoon that bent with every scoop. And it was perfect. Then came the Jello molds. Towering, wobbly masterpieces made in every color of the rainbow. Sometimes with fruit, sometimes with marshmallows, sometimes with shredded carrots, which no one really understood but always politely ate. These molds came out with a dramatic thwack, peeled from their metal homes like edible sculptures. Kids would poke at them, adults would pretend it was not dessert before dinner, and everyone had a favorite color. Red was usually the first to go. Together, these dishes defined the flavor of the holiday. Cool, sweet, tangy, and always a little weird. You did not question it. You just ate it. Because macaroni salad and Jello molds were not just food. They were tradition. Tupperware nostalgia in edible form. And no matter how fancy your 4th of July got, those wiggly, creamy dishes grounded it all in something real. If you have never pinched your thigh on a metal lawn chair, have you really celebrated the 4th of July? In the 1970s, those folding aluminum chairs with woven plastic straps were on every porch, every lawn, and every sidewalk curb during the parade. They were the unofficial seating of summer, lightweight, portable, and always just a little bit too hot from sitting in the sun. You would unfold one with a dramatic snap and hope the straps were not too loose. If they were, down you went, and the whole yard heard about it. The color schemes were loud and proud. Lime, green, and white, orange and yellow, red, white, and blue for the real patriots. Some had a slight lean because one leg was shorter than the others. Some creaked like haunted house furniture. But they were ours. They were the thrones of cookouts, fireworks shows, and block parties. Kids would claim the little ones with cup holders. Dads would carry 5 at once like it was nothing. And moms would remind everyone not to forget them at the park. Again. They stacked neatly in station wagon trunks and sat in garages like soldiers waiting for duty. And when the 4th rolled around, you dusted them off, unbent the legs, and hoped they would hold for one more summer. There was something oddly comforting about that squeak when you sat down, like the chair was saying, "We're back." And it always meant good food, good company, and a view of the sky. Whether it was under the fireworks or in front of the parade, those chairs brought people together. A row of metal frames and woven straps, each one holding up a memory. Before the fireworks lit up the sky and the hamburgers hit the grill, the 4th of July in the 1970s often began with something quiet, something respectful. The color guard and flag folding ceremonies. You did not fidget. You did not talk. You stood still, even if you were just a kid in jelly shoes, because this part mattered. Veterans in uniform would carry the American flag with white gloves, moving slow and steady while the crowd watched with a kind of hush you never heard anywhere else that day. It was not about the show. It was about the meaning. There was a trumpet maybe, or just a cassette tape playing taps. And as they folded the flag, one triangle at a time, you felt the weight of it, even if you did not fully understand it yet. It was something sacred, something solemn. Not sad, but serious in a way that stuck with you. The announcer's voice would crackle over the microphone, saying names you did not know but still somehow felt connected to. And when the flag was finally tucked into that neat triangle, someone would hand it to a family or raise it high on the pole while the crowd placed hands on hearts. That silence, that stillness, it stayed with you, even when the hot dogs started sizzling again and the music kicked back in. The color guard reminded everyone, kids, parents, neighbors, what the day was really about. It was not just a party, it was a remembrance. A moment carved out of a chaotic holiday to honor the people who made it possible. And that triangle of fabric, folded with care, felt heavier than any firework ever could. Before streaming, playlists, or Bluetooth speakers, the 4th of July soundtrack came from one place, your family's portable AM radio. It was usually a rectangle of faded plastic with a big dial and a retractable antenna that only worked if you stood just the right way. You would carry it around the yard, plop it on a folding chair, or let it sit on the hood of your dad's station wagon while it hummed out crackly versions of God Bless America and The Stars and Stripes Forever. Sometimes it picked up a baseball game, sometimes it caught static, but mostly it played the songs that made the air feel proud. Even when the batteries were halfway dead and the volume button made that scratchy noise, you would keep tuning until you found a channel playing something familiar. Those little radios were everywhere, tucked into beach bags, hanging from tree branches, balanced on picnic tables. The voices coming out of them were warm, tinny, full of summer. You could hear them at cookouts, at parades, even at fireworks shows where someone always turned theirs up so the whole crowd could sing along. It was not about the sound quality, it was about the feeling. A shared, low-tech way to say, we're here, we're together. And this day means something. Because when that radio played, "This Land Is Your Land," you were not just listening, you were remembering. And that little speaker somehow carried a whole country's voice. On the 4th of July in the 1970s, nothing made a kid feel more invincible than a glittery eagle on their cheek or a peeling flag tattoo on their arm. Temporary tattoos and face paints were the official uniform of every child running barefoot through the block party. You could get them at the drugstore, folded up in paper envelopes and packed with promises. A damp sponge, 30 seconds of pressure, and you had yourself a full-blown patriotic makeover. Most of them looked a little weird, like a blurry firecracker or a slightly off-center Liberty Bell. But none of that mattered. You would show it off like it was real ink, marching around with your arm held out, hoping someone would notice. The face paint came from folding tables at the park, where a teenager with a brush would paint red stripes and blue stars on 100 sticky cheeks, one after another. It was messy, it was smeared, and it never quite came off in one wash. But it made you feel like you belonged to the day, like you were part of something bigger than just running through sprinklers and eating watermelon slices with your hands. By the end of the night, your paint was halfway gone and your tattoo looked like a weird bruise. But that was part of the charm. You earned that smudge. You wore it like a badge. Because on the 4th, even a temporary tattoo felt like a forever memory. There was always one neighbor who brought out a guitar, one mom who could tap dance, and one brave kid who lip-synced to Elvis like his life depended on it. Community talent shows and lip-sync contests were a beloved 4th of July tradition in the 1970s, sometimes on a stage, sometimes on the back of a flatbed truck, and sometimes just in someone's driveway with a boombox and a lot of nerve. The whole neighborhood would show up, lawn chairs circled around, paper fans flapping, lemonade in hand. Someone would serve sheet cake from a picnic table while the MC, usually the high school principal or someone's uncle, read names off a wrinkled sheet of notebook paper. Every act got applause. Every joke got a laugh. Even when the mic cut out or someone forgot the words, the crowd cheered like it was the Apollo. Because it was not about perfection, it was about joy. About seeing your friends and neighbors be silly, proud, or just plain themselves. The kids' performances always stole the show. Lip-sync battles with plastic microphones, twirling ribbons, and dramatic pauses. You would swear you were watching future stars. Then they would jump off stage and ask for another snow cone. These talent shows were the soul of small-town celebration. No prize money, no judges, no fuss, just community, creativity, and a shared sense of fun. It was the kind of gathering where everyone belonged on stage, even if just for a minute. The 4th of July picnic in the 1970s lived and breathed around one thing, the big wooden table with the red and white checkered cloth. Every park had them, every backyard had at least one, and every family tried to claim the shadiest one early in the day like it was a land grab. The tables were heavy, splintered, and usually had someone's initials carved into the top from a summer long gone. The checkered cloth was pulled tight and clipped down with clothespins or whatever rocks you could find nearby. Dishes came next, bowls of potato salad sweating in the sun, paper plates stacked a mile high, plastic forks in an old coffee can. You knew it was officially lunchtime when someone yelled, "Grab a spot!" Everyone elbowed for space, kids on one side, adults on the other. Someone always spilled a drink. Someone else passed a tray of deviled eggs like they were treasure. And no matter what time it was, someone's uncle was still asking when the hamburgers would be ready. That table saw everything: laughter, arguments, impromptu ketchup bottle wars, and cousins falling asleep under it when the sun got too hot. And when it was time to clean up, you did not fold the cloth. You shook it out, crumbs and all, and folded it with pride. Because that checkered cloth meant tradition, that splintered table meant family, and the picnic spread was the real feast of the 4th. When July heat settled in like a wool blanket, paper fans became your best friend. In the 1970s, there was no misting station, no electric breeze from pocket gadgets. Just folded cardboard fans with wooden sticks, usually handed out at parades or from church groups, with pictures of flags or eagles on one side and a local ad for a car dealership on the back. You would wave them with the urgency of survival, back and forth, faster and faster, until the air felt a few degrees cooler, or at least your arm got tired enough to forget the heat. Moms would hand them to kids like they were golden tickets, hoping it would keep them still for 5 minutes. They rarely worked. Then came the handheld misters, plastic spray bottles filled with ice water, sometimes lemon-scented if your aunt was feeling fancy. You would spritz your neck, your knees, maybe a friend if you were feeling brave. Someone always went overboard and soaked the whole blanket. These little tools were more than just cooling devices. They were signs that you were staying, that no matter how hot it got, no one was leaving early. The show was still coming. The fireworks were still waiting. You fanned. You spritzed. You endured. And it became part of the ritual. One more layer of grit in a day already packed with sunburns and slow-cooked memories. Because sometimes, staying cool meant more than comfort. It meant commitment to the celebration. TV dinners turned the living room into a dining room, one foil tray at a time. They were not new in the 1960s, but this was the decade they really took off, just as television became the centerpiece of American family life. You got a little compartment for meatloaf, one for mashed potatoes, another for corn, maybe a brownie tucked into the corner. All you had to do was pop it in the oven, wait, and serve. No planning, no cleanup, no arguing over what to cook. The tray itself felt futuristic. Everything had its place. The food was not gourmet, but it was warm, salty, and comforting in its predictability. Families could eat while watching their favorite shows. Kids could feel like grown-ups with their own personal meal. The appeal was clear, fast, easy, and made to match the rhythm of modern life. TV dinners were more than just food. They were a new way to eat, one that said it was okay to sit on the couch and focus on The Ed Sullivan Show or Bonanza. The clang of a fork against aluminum still echoes in memory. For many, it was the sound of dinner and television becoming one. They were not just dolls, they were your children, adopted, named, cared for like living, breathing extensions of your heart. Cabbage Patch Kids exploded into American homes like nothing else before them. Chubby cheeks, yarn hair, signed bottoms, they were adorable and slightly strange. But they were yours. No two were the same. That was the magic. It felt personal, like fate. Parents fought in department stores to get them. Shelves emptied in seconds. News clips showed grown adults wrestling over plush plastic babies. It was not just a toy. It was a phenomenon. And it swept through the country like a fever dream. Kids brought them everywhere, to school, to bed, to dinner. They came with birth certificates and backstories, turning playtime into family drama. In an age of make-believe, these dolls made things feel real. The craze might sound ridiculous today, but in the moment, it was everything. A doll you had to adopt? That was not just marketing, it was genius. It made you feel responsible, important, part of something. And when the madness faded, what was left was a memory of wide-eyed joy, pure affection, and a little friend who made childhood feel alive. They were not just vehicles, they were dreams on wheels, decked out in shag carpet and questionable murals of wizards and wolves. Vansploitation films took the freedom and rebellion of the open road and turned it into cinematic chaos. The plot usually did not matter. A guy, a girl, a van, and a summer full of terrible decisions, that was enough. The van in 1977 set the tone, a teenage fantasy of cruising, partying, and trying to look cool while living in your car. And people loved it. Because those vans were more than transportation. They were rolling bedrooms, bars, escape pods. They had curtains. They had couches. Some had lava lamps. If you were lucky, yours had an 8-track player and speakers in the back. The funny part is how deeply uncool it looks now. But at the time, it was everything. Independence, adventure, privacy. For a generation raised on rules, the van was a loophole with fuzzy dice on the mirror. Tangy Taffy was the candy you had to work for, and that was half the fun. Long before it became part of the Laffy Taffy brand, this chewy strip came in a thin plastic wrapper and offered a sweet, stretchy challenge for any sugar-loving kid in the 1960s. It came in vibrant colors and punchy flavors like grape, strawberry, and sour apple, each one delivering a jolt of sugar and just the right amount of tartness. You could bend it, stretch it, or roll it into a ball before finally taking a bite. The longer you chewed, the stronger the flavor got, which made it perfect for kids trying to make a nickel's worth of candy last the whole afternoon. Sometimes it stuck to your teeth. Sometimes it stuck to the wrapper. But it was always worth it. Tangy Taffy was less about elegance and more about fun, bright, bold, and unapologetically sweet. For many kids, it was the ultimate playground treat, swapped on school buses or bought from corner stores with pocket change. Today's candies may be smoother or flashier, but they cannot match the simple satisfaction of a taffy you could stretch, fold, and chew until your jaw hurt. Going to the movies in the 1980s was not just an outing, it was an initiation. You did not just watch Back to the Future. You traveled in time. You did not just see E.T., you believed in aliens, friendship, and flying bikes. The Goonies made treasure hunts seem plausible in your own backyard. Ghostbusters had you checking every closet for slime. These were not just movies, they were portals, promises, and rites of passage. Every frame was burned into memory, every line quoted in playgrounds and lunchrooms. Blockbusters were not about selling tickets, they were about shaping imaginations. They gave us John Williams scores that made hearts race and Spielberg visions that made magic feel real. Crowds lined up outside theaters, popcorn in hand, hearts pounding. Parents, kids, teens, they all came together in the darkness of a movie theater to be transformed. These films were louder, brighter, funnier, and somehow deeper than anything that came before. And when the credits rolled, you did not leave the theater the same person who walked in. You left dreaming, you left changed. The movies of the 1980s did not just entertain a generation, they raised one. Clackers were dangerous, but that just made them better. 2 acrylic spheres tethered by string, daring you to swing them so perfectly they'd smack together in a perfect rhythm. When you got it right, magic. When you didn't, bruises. Every playground in the 1970s echoed with the unmistakable clack, clack, clack of kids testing their reflexes and pushing their luck. You'd time your swings, adjust your grip, and pray your fingers didn't get caught. There were no rules, no instructions. Just noise and adrenaline. They were toys with consequences, which somehow made them cooler. Every mark left behind was worn like a badge of honor. Clackers were banned in some schools, feared by parents, but that only added to their mystique. You weren't just playing, you were proving something. You could handle it. You had skills, or at least, you were brave enough to try. The funny part? We kept buying them, breaking them, and begging for more. Clackers weren't safe, but they were unforgettable. Going to Pizza Hut in the 80s was not just about food, it was an event. The smell hit you before the door even closed behind you. Red checkered tablecloths, thick menus with pictures, glasses filled with cola and crushed ice, and in the corner, an arcade machine waiting to eat your quarters. It was magic. You sat in those big red booths with your family or your friends, flipping through laminated menus like you were at a fine dining joint. Pan pizza was the crown jewel, crispy, buttery, sizzling with cheese that stretched for miles. It was not about fast food, It was about the experience. You waited for your pie like it was a sacred ritual. The jukebox hummed in the background. Maybe your server wore a paper hat. Maybe you got to read a comic book while waiting. Maybe you found a new favorite game. Pizza Hut was a memory factory. A warm, gooey, perfectly greasy escape from whatever was happening outside. And for a kid in the 80s, it was a kingdom. The pizza was hot, the games were bright, and the moments were golden. It was not just dinner, it was a slice of happiness. Twister was the game that got people off the couch and tangled in each other's limbs. Released in 1966, it came with a plastic mat covered in colored circles and a spinner that decided your next move. Left hand red, right foot green. Before you knew it, you were stretching across the mat in a precarious pose, face pressed against someone's knee, hoping no one slipped. It was silly, physical, and weirdly intimate. Some parents called it indecent. Some schools banned it. But kids loved it. So did teenagers. It broke the ice at parties, sparked laughter between siblings, and gave families something active to do together. It was as much about falling over as it was about winning. The rustle of the mat, the sound of giggles as someone toppled, the concentration in trying to stay upright, it was all part of the fun. Twister took no prep and delivered instant chaos. It did not care about strategy. It cared about balance, luck, and how far you could stretch without collapsing. And for many, it was the first time a game made you move, laugh, and fall down all in one messy, unforgettable moment. There were bands, and then there were hair metal bands. They did not just play music, they exploded onto the stage. Bon Jovi, Mötley Crüe, Poison, these were not just names. They were icons with teased hair, eyeliner, and leather pants so tight they could probably break glass. The 80s were loud, flashy, and unapologetic, and hair metal was the soundtrack. These bands brought arena anthems and pyrotechnics and turned concerts into full-blown rock operas. They made being over the top a lifestyle. Power ballads met guitar solos that could melt your face off. It was glam, grit, and glory all rolled into a headbang, and they owned it. From the moment they strutted on stage, they dripped charisma and chaos. Music videos looked like wild fever dreams, smoke machines, motorcycles, women in fringe, and men who looked like peacocks in heat. And we loved it. Teens blasted them in bedrooms. Posters covered every inch of the wall. Even parents, reluctantly or not, knew the lyrics. These bands made rebellion look like theater. And for a generation that craved identity, they gave us swagger, eyeliner, and the kind of sound you could feel in your bones. Hair metal was not subtle, but neither was the 80s. It was the kind of madness only the 1970s could have invented. Strip down, sprint across a public space, and somehow make it feel like a movement. Streaking wasn't just a prank, it was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. And at its peak, it was happening everywhere. College campuses, football fields, live television broadcasts. You'd be mid-sentence or mid-cheer, and boom. Someone zipped by in nothing but sneakers and bravery, trailing shock and giggles in their wake. It wasn't about indecency. It was about absurdity, rebellion, the raw human need to scream, "I exist," in the weirdest way possible. And as strange as it sounds, it brought people together. Total strangers would burst into laughter, point, cheer, and for a second forget everything serious. Forget Nixon, forget bills, forget the fact that dinner was Spam again. Streaking turned the world into a stage, and the performer didn't need a script, just guts. It's funny now how casual it was, how a naked sprint through a graduation ceremony could end in applause. But maybe that was the beauty of it. The 1970s weren't always glamorous, but they were alive. Wildly, ridiculously alive. Barrel of Monkeys was proof that the simplest ideas can last the longest. Released in 1965, the game came in a bright plastic barrel filled with plastic monkeys that linked together by their arms. That was it. No batteries, no board, no setup time. Just spill the monkeys and try to link as many as you could without dropping the chain. It was harder than it looked. The curved arms never seemed to hook just right, and one wrong move could send your whole line tumbling. But when you did it, When you made it past 10 or 15 monkeys, it felt like a small miracle. Kids would challenge each other to beat their records, dump and restart over and over, totally absorbed. The monkeys themselves were colorful, cheerful, and perfectly palm-sized. The game traveled well. It lived in car glove boxes, grandma's house drawers, and birthday party goodie bags. Decades later, the design remains almost unchanged, which says something about how right they got it the first time. Before screens took over fidget time, there was just you, a barrel, and 24 tiny monkeys daring you to beat your best. If the 1980s had a soundtrack, it blared from a boombox. Big, bulky, and proud, the boombox was more than just a stereo. It was a statement. You carried it on your shoulder not because it was easy, but because it was loud. It was rebellion with a battery pack. Hip-hop rose from sidewalks and city blocks, and the boombox was its pulpit. Breakdancers made cardboard stages. Crowds formed like rituals. The music roared, and the city danced. These machines brought bass into backyards, rhythm into corners, and unity into chaos. Whether it was Grandmaster Flash or Run DMC, whether it was Michael Jackson or Madonna, the boombox did not care. It amplified whoever held the power cord. You controlled the vibe. And that mattered. It mattered so much. Because in an era without streaming, without smartphones, without wireless speakers, the boombox gave you freedom. The louder you played, the louder you were. It was not just about music, it was about identity, expression, and claiming your own tiny stage wherever you stood. There was a time when television had limits. You watched what was on when it was on, and if you missed it, you missed it. But then came cable, and everything changed. With channels like HBO and CNN, the screen stopped sleeping. Suddenly, news was 24 hours. Movies were uncut. Content was uncensored. It felt dangerous and fresh. CNN became a window to the world, always open, always watching. For the first time, you could follow breaking news as it happened. It felt like the future. HBO, meanwhile, turned your living room into a movie theater. It was wild to see films on your own couch. No commercials, no edits. Just you, a bowl of popcorn, and a level of access that felt like magic. Cable gave you choices, dozens of channels, sports, comedy, drama, documentaries. It was not just television anymore. It was a world within a box, and it turned passive watchers into curious explorers. Kids stayed up late watching reruns they were not supposed to. Adults discovered stand-up comedy that pushed boundaries. It connected us, divided us, obsessed us, and it never turned off. Cable television was not just a new way to watch, it was a new way to live. Blacklight posters weren't just wall art. They were like secret messages to your future self, glowing with untamed energy in bedrooms lit by nothing but neon. You'd close the door, switch on the blacklight bulb, and the entire room transformed. Tigers snarled in ultraviolet orange, mushrooms shimmered with galactic pink, and skeletons danced across velvet paper like ghosts at a cosmic rave. You didn't need to be a teenager to love them, but you definitely felt like one the moment you saw one. They were psychedelic, electric, and sometimes downright disturbing. And that was the point. These posters weren't meant to calm you down. They were meant to blow your mind. Every friend who visited your room would stand and stare, half laughing, half lost in the glowing madness. You didn't always understand what you were looking at, and somehow that made it cooler. They were rebellious in their own quiet way. Too weird for the living room, too loud for the hallway, but perfect for the sacred space that was your bedroom. Looking back, it's funny how seriously we took them. But at the time, they were more than just decorations. They were personality printed in phosphorescence. Slide projectors were the original family theater. Before smartphones and digital albums, the only way to share vacation photos was by dimming the lights, pulling down a screen or a blank wall, and clicking through a carousel of 35mm slides. You could hear the quiet hum of the machine, the mechanical clunk as each new photo dropped into place, and the occasional groan from someone who had already seen them twice. But there was magic in it. These evenings were about more than just pictures. They were about storytelling. The beach trip where Dad sunburned his feet. The blurry shot of Grandma mid-sneeze. The perfectly framed sunset over the Grand Canyon. Families would laugh, tease, and remember together, sometimes with popcorn, always with commentary. The projector cast not just images, but atmosphere, the darkened room, the warmth of shared memory, and the feeling that what you were seeing mattered because everyone else was seeing it too. Slide projectors may be obsolete now, but for those who grew up in the 1960s, they were a rite of passage, a way to relive moments in slow, glowing frames, one dusty click at a time. It started with 6 colors, just 6. But somehow, it unlocked a puzzle that would challenge millions of minds and define an era. The Rubiks Cube was not just a toy. It was an obsession, a flex, a frustration, and a badge of honor, all crammed into a twisting, clicking square. You either solved it or you peeled the stickers off. There was no in-between. Classrooms, kitchens, and family living rooms were all temporary battlegrounds for who could line up the colors first. It looked simple, but it demanded patience, logic, and a kind of determination that made it feel like a test of character. And oh, the speed solvers, like magicians, like gods. The cube became a status symbol among kids and a stress toy for adults. It was everywhere: commercials, competitions, cereal box giveaways. You were not cool if you had not at least tried to conquer it. For a moment, the Rubiks Cube was the brainy heart of the decade, a symbol of what it meant to be smart and stylish. It taught an entire generation to keep twisting, keep trying, and keep believing that order could come from chaos. You could hear it in the first note. Sunshine Pop was like opening a window in your soul and letting the summer breeze in. It was not just music, it was a feeling. Bright, bouncy, unreasonably optimistic. The harmonies stacked like pancakes, the melodies sparkled like soda fizz, and everything about it made you want to roll down a grassy hill and laugh for no reason. You may not remember every lyric, but you remember how it made you feel. Like anything was possible and everything was going to be okay. Even if you were 10 and the world was just your backyard and your mom's burnt grilled cheese. Bands like The Fifth Dimension and The Association sang in choruses that felt like hugs. Up, Up and Away was not just a song, it was a rocket ship made of brass and harmonies. The funny part is how relentlessly happy it all was. Unapologetically cheerful. Like it knew the world was a mess but chose joy anyway. It might sound cheesy now, maybe even a little naive. But back then it felt like hope. And even if it only lasted 3 minutes, that hope was everything. Fondue parties were peak 1960s sophistication, cheesy, communal, and irresistibly fun. Imported from Switzerland and embraced by American hostesses everywhere, fondue turned dinner into an event. Friends gathered around bubbling pots of melted Gruyere or Emmental, long forks in hand, dipping cubes of crusty bread into molten gold. It was interactive, slightly exotic, and made conversation flow almost as much as the wine. The fondue pot itself became a household item, sleek, colorful, often gifted at weddings. There were rules. Do not drop your bread in the pot, stir in a figure 8, and keep the cheese smooth. Some added white wine or garlic, others experimented with chocolate fondue for dessert. Either way, the evening was about more than food. It was about sharing, laughing, and leaning in, literally and socially. In an era that embraced kitsch and community, fondue was a perfect fit. It brought people together in a circle, turned dinner into performance, and gave every guest a role to play. Long before tapas or charcuterie boards, fondue was the original shareable meal. For those who remember the scent of wine and cheese wafting through a mid-century living room, it was a flavor and feeling that defined the times. The future did not arrive with a bang. It arrived in a beige plastic box that hummed quietly on a desk in the corner of your house. The Commodore 64, the Apple Macintosh. These were not just machines, they were portals into something entirely new. You typed, and the screen listened. You clicked, and doors opened. At first, it was simple. Word processors, floppy disks, a little green cursor blinking like it had a secret. But quickly, it became more. Games, learning, possibility. For kids, it was a playground. For parents, a tool. For dreamers, a revolution. It changed homework. It changed jobs. It changed you. That blinking cursor? It whispered that anything was possible. Families gathered around, just trying to figure it out together. The sound of a printer was like the future on paper. And the internet? Still a myth. Still a whisper. But you felt it coming. With every boot-up chime, every pixelated game, every painstaking keystroke, you were stepping into a new world. Personal computers did not just change technology. They changed lives. And for the first time ever, the future was not in a sci-fi movie. It was sitting on your desk. They clacked. They thudded. They echoed across school hallways and suburban sidewalks like someone dropped a toolbox full of maracas. Clogs were not just shoes. They were the sound of the 1970s growing louder with every step. Imported in spirit from the Netherlands but reimagined in American malls, these wooden-soled shoes made fashion louder, literally. Kids wore them, parents wore them, teachers wore them, and then regretted it halfway through the school day. There was no sneaking around in clogs. They announced you like a drumline at a parade. But they were sturdy, comfortable, if you got used to them, and they felt weirdly rebellious. Like your feet were telling the world, yeah, I'm gonna be loud about it. Maybe they were impractical. Maybe they didn't match anything you owned, but they looked good with bell bottoms. And in a decade that was all about expression, clogs didn't whisper. They stomped. The funny part is how seriously we took them, like wearing a chunk of painted wood strapped to your foot was the height of elegance. But back then, it was. And if you grew up in that era, you remember how it felt to hear your own footsteps echo through the mall food court like you were walking across the moon. Miniskirts arrived like a fashion revolution. Short, sharp, and bold, they sliced through the conservative silhouettes of the 1950s and became the defining garment of the 1960s youth movement. Popularized by designers like Mary Quant and embraced by British mod culture, the miniskirt represented freedom, rebellion, and a new kind of confidence. It was daring but playful, feminine but fierce. Hemlines rose, attitudes shifted, and suddenly women were claiming space on the streets, on the dance floor, and in the workplace. The skirt barely reached mid-thigh, often paired with bold patterns, bright colors, or textured fabrics like corduroy and vinyl. Worn with turtlenecks or boxy jackets, it was as much about contrast as it was about comfort. Women weren't just dressing up, they were dressing out, outward, loudly, visibly. Some schools banned them. Some parents frowned. But the miniskirt kept rising in popularity and in cut. It became a uniform of sorts for women carving out new identities in a changing world. They were photographed on street corners, in protest marches, at record stores, and in the pages of glossy magazines. Photos from the time show crowds of young people in knee socks and miniskirts, smiling wide, striding forward. It was not just fashion, it was a statement. And for those who lived it, it is still stitched into the fabric of memory, one daring hem at a time. The shopping mall was more than a place to buy things. It was the beating heart of teenage life. You did not just go to the mall, you lived there. It was where you met your friends, saw your crush, and discovered who you wanted to be. The food court was your kingdom. The arcade was your battleground. And the record store? That was your soul. Malls in the 80s were social cathedrals built from neon lights and polished tiles. You tried on clothes you could not afford. You loitered for hours. You flirted by the Orange Julius. And if you were lucky, your favorite store had a photo booth to capture the chaos. Escalators became runways. Hallways were arenas of style and identity. Whether it was Spencer's, The Gap, or Foot Locker, every store felt like its own little world. You were not just shopping, you were performing. The mall was your stage. Your friends were your co-stars. And the soundtrack? A steady stream of synth pop and laughter echoing off the glass. It was where friendships began and hearts broke, where trends were born and gossip spread faster than wildfire. In the 80s, the mall was not just a building, it was the center of the universe. If any of these memories lit a spark, tell us your favorite, tap that thumbs up like it's the grill lid on a Weber kettle, and subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the good old days.